I'm Matt at Nexus Baseball, and this is episode 14 of the Tommy John Epidemic. This series is a YouTube read of content from the book Plague of the Gods, an outsider's perspective on baseball's Tommy John epidemic, which is available now on Amazon. I decided to put this content on YouTube to make the material as accessible as possible. This series examines the science behind the most superhuman action the human body can produce, accelerating a baseball up to 100 miles per hour. Pitchers of prior eras would coast by throwing submaximally and then turn up the dial when they needed a strikeout, or in key situations that required it. This could have allowed them to pace themselves as a marathon runner would, choosing their moments for when extra bursts of speed are required. There is also the windup versus the stretch to consider. With no one on base, a pitcher can pitch out of the windup, pumping their hands over their head or with a high leg kick. This position is known not to improve velocity as had once been thought, but instead is now considered to reduce arm stress by allowing the momentum of the body to do more of the work. This makes perfect sense, as watching anyone attempt a strength exercise, the natural inclination is to use momentum, swinging the weight or bouncing it to lower the exertion level. Forcing the body to be more static makes the exercise more targeted and challenging. Additionally, there are the different pitch types to consider. Breaking balls should be ideally thrown with the same motion and arm speed as the fastball to increase their deception to the hitter. Therefore, they should create the same exertion on the body. That said, the different pronation or positions of the hand may also cause the shoulder or arm muscles to do more or less work on the delivery. This may cause specific fatigue at a higher relative rate to the pitcher's overall level of conditioning. The purpose of this discussion is to illustrate the challenges of assessing an individual pitcher's endurance level. By not allowing individuals to go to a safe percentage of their overall capacity, the pitch limits may in fact be weakening their capabilities. This would be akin to forcing all members of a gym to perform 20 push-ups per workout, regardless of size or strength. For some, that might prove a daunting challenge of maximum effort and therefore may cause a gain in strength, whereas for others, they may in fact be losing strength, as their capabilities are much higher due to their conditioning from other activities. These variabilities make the creation of any league-wide policy almost impossible to implement effectively. The modern data itself will also be challenging, if not impossible, to interpret with the modern pitch limits in place after the epidemic of Tommy John surgeries was in full swing. Suppose that the league conducted a study of all starting pitchers from 2012 to 2017, a period of 5 years. If they analyzed if there was any correlation between usage and injury, their data would most likely be useless. This is because most starting pitchers, barring injury, would be pitching at similar levels of output due to pitch counts. Alternatively, if they analyzed average pitch velocity and compared it with injury risk, they might see a small correlation between velocity and injury. But how is that velocity achieved, and by whom? Starting pitchers now frequently throw with maximum effort from the first pitch, just like relievers do. If two starters throw maximally for 100 pitches, one may be just warming up while the other is redlining to keep their velocity up. If allowed to pitch to maximum safe endurance levels, the first pitcher might tap out after 150 pitches, whereas the other after only 70. That is simply their capability level based on mechanics, genetics, and training. The negative consequence of the huge push for analytics in baseball is that on a league-wide level, it is easy to drown in the quantity and detail of the data and not come to any conclusions, or worse, erroneous ones. It is impossible to look at the individualities as well as the trends to determine causation, in this case, the culprit behind the Tommy John epidemic. The second question is how to utilize the data from individual pitchers to create best practices. Key to the analysis of best practices is an understanding of the concept of survivor bias. The basis for this bias, in our case, is the holding up of a single individual. For example, Nolan Ryan and his 100-mile-per-hour fastball, career spanning 4 decades, as well as multiple 300-inning seasons, as an automatic ideal due to his success. Ryan was clearly a statistical outlier in every category. One of the top pitchers in the history of the sport, he possessed a unique combination of power, endurance, and longevity that could easily be held up as an ideal to aspire to. Tom House, who worked with Ryan on the Texas Rangers, modeled his understanding of what the ideal pitching motion should look like precisely based on Ryan's mechanics. He broke down his motion using computer software to look at every element from glove angle to stride distance to discover what made him tick. He published several books over the following 20 years, further refining his process as technology and his understanding evolved. House recognized that given technological advances, and as his skills as an analyst increased, that some of his initial assumptions needed to be changed. What did not change, however, was his use of Ryan's mechanics as the bedrock foundation of his ideal. At first look, this would appear entirely logical. Why not use one of the most successful pitchers in baseball history to create an ideal movement pattern? The problem with this approach is that it takes the statistical outlier, the aberration in the data set, and uses it to define the pattern. If I took 100 cats and threw them off a 10-story building, there was a probability that one would survive its fall relatively unscathed. Please note, I love cats and do not advocate violence against them. I'm just a fan of Schrödinger. If I increase this number upwards continually, it would become a near certainty. In fact, you hear stories of cats falling off condo balconies and surviving each year on the local news. This could occur due to any number of factors completely outside of the cat's control, including size, weight, density, muscular control, balance, where they landed, and random chance. The reality is that the vast majority would perish or suffer terrible injuries. Taking Nolan Ryan as the pinnacle example and blaming injuries on not doing exactly what he did would be the equivalent of blaming the other 99 cats for not doing what the one cat that walked away had accomplished naturally. Ryan may have had any number of unique and unduplicatable physiological or contextual advantages we may never know. In fact, not only did Ryan have surgery to remove bone chips in his elbow in 1975, but in 1986 Dr. Jobe suggested Ryan undergo Tommy John to repair a tear in his UCL. He refused, and his body allowed him to pitch for 7 more seasons before it finally gave out. When placed in this context, one realizes the necessity of controlling for individual fluctuations in the data. In properly executed studies, such extreme abnormalities in a dataset would often be removed to not taint the dataset as a whole. What is much more important than determining a single ideal is the determination of factors that the widest group of successful and uninjured pitchers share. This is the same process by which the ideal motions for sprinting and discus were derived from, that Tom House had described. It is likely that through distilling all of the data, particularly as technology allows for better measurement of the quick motion of the pitch, that this will eventually result in an ideal set of near-universal best practices. The first inklings of this are seen today with the removal of most of the extreme flourishes of pitching over the last 20 years, including high leg kicks. More and more pitchers are pitching exclusively from the stretch position normally reserved for runners on base in order to simplify their mechanics and make them more repeatable. Join me for episode 15 next week. Remember, if you like the content, please like and subscribe. Your support makes this work possible. Also, if you want to jump ahead, please consider picking up the book on Amazon from the link in the description below. See you next week.